My parents died in a car accident, and I inherited $200 million. But my husband, Paul, wants a divorce. I agreed in a heartbeat, and even scheduled a bank transfer right then and there. Paul looked at me suspiciously. Anna, you're being too generous. Me generous? That day was 3 days after the world-ending blizzard. Sure, I'd give him that money, but he'd have to live long enough to spend it. After my parents' sudden accident, the funeral wasn't even over when Paul went MIA. On the third day, his lawyer showed up with divorce papers. That's when I found out that we've had irreconcilable differences for the past 5 years. Apparently, the 2 years he was supposedly relocated for work became proof of our alleged separation. According to the law, without a will, my parents' inheritance is also considered marital property, subject to division. But surprisingly, I wasn't shocked or panicked. I accepted the divorce and agreed to all of Paul's demands regarding the asset split. By that afternoon, Paul rushed over to sign the divorce papers. After signing, he looked at me and asked, "So when are we handling the asset distribution?" He couldn't even pretend anymore. Just signed and already pressing me for the transfer. I smiled, pulled out my phone and said, "Right now." I put the phone on speaker and called the bank manager in front of Paul. Since the sum was enormous, the process was complex and required an appointment. I tapped the calendar and selected a date. It was 8 days later, the same day as our wedding anniversary. Paul seemed uneasy for a moment when he saw the date I chose, but quickly returned to doubt. "Anna, you're being too nice?" "Me nice?" That was the third day after the terrifying blizzard apocalypse. Snow was everywhere, making the air so cold it was suffocating. That was the day Paul and his mistress locked me outside to freeze to death. I couldn't move, my limbs were numb, and I froze into a sculpture. The fierce wind shattered my frozen body. I never expected to be reborn before my parents' accident. This time, I had them write a will and fake my death to escape. No matter if the blizzard comes or not, Paul isn't getting a cent. After Paul left, I video called my dad. The call connected almost instantly. My mom's worried face appeared. "Paul, how are things on your end? When can you come over?" "Yes, I told my parents everything as soon as I was reborn." My dad checked the car involved in the accident and found tampering. After that, he believed everything I said. After the funeral, I personally sent them to a pre-bought mountain villa and made a detailed list of all the preparations needed. Holding my phone, I walked to the balcony. "Everything's smooth. I'll make a show of moving, then come over. How about you guys?" My mom flipped the camera to show me the house. The villa had undergone a major transformation. Apart from the supplies I asked them to stock, they reinforced the windows and bought heating equipment. My dad even remodeled the electric, windproof, and drainage systems. He's a designer, and based on my vague description of a blizzard, he crafted comprehensive designs. Right now, he's testing the floor heating with his sleeves rolled up. Seeing my mom point the camera at him, he straightened up. "Anna, once the heating's done, even in a blizzard, you can wear a t-shirt indoors without feeling cold. If you want anything else, write it down. I'll get it for you this afternoon." My nose tingled, almost bringing me to tears. Though it's been half a month since my rebirth, it still feels surreal. In my past life, my parents died so suddenly. Before I could cope with the grief, I was betrayed by the husband I trusted. Then the blizzard apocalypse arrived. I didn't last 3 days. Coming back, the excruciating cold that shattered my bones still engulfed me. Choking back tears, I said, "I want my mom's clear soup noodles." On the other side, my parents' eyes turned red. After moving back, I found Paul sulking on the couch. The moment he saw me, he erupted in anger. "Anna, where are my parents? Don't tell me you don't know. Their last appearance was meeting you at home." I was momentarily stunned by his question, then chuckled in disbelief. "Paul, are you nuts? Your parents are missing and you're asking me? It's almost New Year. They did come by to drop off some pickled veggies and smoked meat, but they left right after. If you're so capable tracing them to my house, can't you trace them leaving?" Paul, suppressing his anger, went to check the fridge and found I wasn't lying. "Even if what you said is true, the fact remains they're missing. And they went missing before your parents' accident. Anna, even if the bodies are cremated, I'll get experts to test the blood at the scene and compare DNA. If I find out you had a hand in my parents' deaths, I will end you." With that threat, Paul stormed out. When the door clicked shut, the tension in me finally eased. That's when I realized, despite the cold, my back was soaked in sweat. Paul's legal mind was just too sharp. The day his parents came over, a guy from the BMW store was delivering my New Year's gift while promoting a new car. During the chat, it came up that my dad bought a new car 2 months ago. Paul's dad loved it, staring at the pic and praising it for ages. After his mom used the restroom, they left. It was only after everyone left that I returned to the bedroom and noticed the spare key to the BMW was missing. I'd had valuable stuff go missing from our home before. The first time I even called the cops. But once it was traced back to Paul's parents, things got awkward between our families. After that, I rented a locker for my valuables. But I never expected them to stoop as low as swiping a car key. It was still that car, tampered with and yet to be fixed. I quickly called to warn them, but neither of them picked up. Then the car accident report came in. Once I calmed down, I decided my parents should fake their deaths and disappear. Paul wanted to kill my parents, but ended up accidentally killing his own. Is this karma coming around? Paul was indeed cautious. That night, I got messages from several DNA testing labs. He had commissioned them all. Unfortunately for him, I was one step ahead. I had already contacted all the labs he could reach both inside and outside the city. During the divorce settlement, Paul took the big apartment we lived in. I spent 3 days moving out everything movable. Left him with just 2 beds. I had once caught him and his mistress, stark naked in that bed, in a very ugly scene. Those beds haunted me. It was then I learned she was Alice, the beloved he claimed had died 5 years ago. He had fabricated the story to paint a picture of himself as a deeply loving man, all just to win me over. After the move, at a hotel, I sipped coffee while watching the surveillance feed on my phone. The footage showed Alice handing Paul a document. I paused and enlarged the image. It was a DNA report. Paul's eyebrows immediately furrowed as he exclaimed, "How is this possible? Did you get it wrong?" Alice shook her head. "No mistakes, 5 labs, same result. The blood at the scene belonged to Anna's parents." "Paul, maybe you've been working too hard. Maybe they just went on vacation and lost their phones. Give it a few days and they might reach out." As she talked, she smoothed out his brow. Paul relaxed and pulled her in for a passionate kiss. Having lived through my awful death and rebirth, witnessing this didn't sadden me. It just made me nauseous. I couldn't hold it in and rushed to the bathroom, vomiting uncontrollably. When I came back, I unexpectedly saw Paul's face magnified on my screen, right in front of the camera. I knew it wasn't good. Before I could react, the image flickered and the connection snapped. That was a bad sign. I decided to leave that night. But as I was about to go, more trouble came up. Some terms of the divorce agreement were still pending. Paul applied for a court injunction against me. Although the court hadn't approved it, with a suit against me, I couldn't take the highway. I was forced to take back roads. The mountain roads were tricky. The recent snow had frozen over, and they were narrow and tough to navigate. On the local radio, 2 meteorologists debated. One said this winter was unusually cold, and the snowfall was extreme, warning of potential severe weather. The other thought he was exaggerating, and they argued loudly. Then the station played a recording of people being interviewed. Citizen 1. The city's always on smog alert. It's been years since I've seen snow. The only 2 times were artificial. This time, I'm just happy. Great snow brings a prosperous year. Hope it snows more. Citizen 2. Everyone online is sharing snow pictures. It really makes me happy. I hope we get a lot more snow this year. The more the better. The more the better. Once the snow engulfs buildings and the world is nothing but white, with icy winds cutting into your cheeks, they'll learn. More isn't always better. Bang! My SUV suddenly stalled. I wanted to get out to check, but it started sliding slowly backward. Terrified, I looked back. The road led directly to a foggy cliff's edge. My heart pounded in my throat. Watching as the SUV gained speed, I had no time to waste. I grabbed my phone and jumped out. Then a loud crash echoed. The SUV broke through the barrier and plunged off the cliff. Hitting the frozen ground knocked the wind out of me. My body ached like it was shattering, and the world spun before my eyes. With searing pain, I blacked out. Boom! I awoke to thunder. Before I could open my eyes, hail pelted down. It hurt everywhere. I looked around and realized I was still on the mountain road where the crash happened. It was 6:42 a.m., yet it felt like dusk. I struggled to lift myself and stumbled to a large rock for cover. I tried calling my dad, but the calls wouldn't go through. Eventually, my phone showed no signal. When the hail finally dwindled, I clutched my phone and started walking. The sky darkened as heavy snow poured down, reliving the agony of dying before. I could barely breathe, collapsing in despair. The road seemed endless. Suddenly, a strange mechanical noise shattered the silence. A snowplow, lights flashing, appeared with my dad's voice joyfully calling "Sweetheart." Tears welled in my eyes. I had been saved. Finally able to relax, I slept soundly till dawn. They couldn't reach me and got worried. Fortunately, I had downloaded a tracking app on their phones for safety. They tracked my location. My dad had been plowing snow, searching for me for a whole day and night. I was eating the clear noodle soup my mom made by hand. The steam made my eyes all red. The heavy snow didn't last long before it stopped. Everyone online was excitedly sharing snow photos, but a handful of people, aware of the potential crisis, were urging others to stock up on supplies. They got slammed with thousands of negative comments. Even their homes were tracked down. I was going to comment, but decided to close the page instead. My phone suddenly vibrated. The bank manager informed me that everything was processed ahead of schedule, and I could come by any time for the transfer. And tomorrow was the official start of the snow apocalypse. I sent the message from the bank manager to Paul. Then I left him a voice note. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. I'll wait 5 minutes tops. If you're not there, I'm out. Paul replied instantly. Don't worry, I'll be there before you. I smirked, exited the chat, and called my private lawyer. Then I tipped off the media about the whole thing. The next morning, my phone woke me up with a buzz. Ignoring the messages from Paul, I opened the web browser. The headline was glaring. Parents die in car accident. Only daughter inherits $200 million estate. Then loving husband files for divorce to split inheritance. It was #1 on trending. The news blew up. From the media videos, you could see Paul freaking out at the bank, smashing the reporters' cameras. I laughed and messaged the media group. Good job, folks. I suggest you sue my ex-husband for damages. Get as much as you can, and I'll cover the attorney fees. And then there was a whole bunch of thanks. I casually reminded them that the snow was getting heavier and suggested they stock up on supplies at home. Later that afternoon, another big story broke, overshadowing mine and Paul's. 100+ people were injured in a subway accident in the city. The reason being, the snowy tracks caused the emergency brakes to fail, leading to a collision. Just like in the past, it was a sign of the apocalypse coming. The snow apocalypse was really here. When Alice sent me a video, I was chilling with my parents, watching a drama. I got up and went to the bedroom before opening the video. In it, Alice tricked Paul into taking his jacket off, saying she wanted to shoot a short video, and got him out of the house. Once he was out, she locked the door. Also, she quickly deleted his fingerprint. By the time Paul realized, it was too late. Paul was banging on the door outside with his phone. Alice, what's this about? Are you messing with me? In this freezing weather, locking me out. If anything happens to me, you'll be legally responsible. Alice. Meanwhile, my phone was blowing up with notifications. It was the neighborhood group I hadn't logged out of yet. Alice must have blocked Paul's contact. So he was losing it, dropped his usual polite act, and started angrily tagging Alice in the group. Also nagging management to send a locksmith. They said they put in a request, but no locksmiths accepted it. Totally expected. The snow was piling up, getting thicker by the hour. Heavy snow warnings were being issued all over the country. Some quick-thinking places had already shut down schools and work. Nobody was gonna risk their life for just a few $100. Alice sent me a voice message. Anna, I've locked him out just like you said. When will you transfer my money? Before dying in my past life, I had Alice thoroughly investigated. She came from a poor background, but had a face that could rival a celebrity's. If it were on a wealthy heiress, it'd be even better. But on her, it was just unfortunate. She'd been the object of male affection since school. First loves, abortions, dropping out, being a mistress. Whatever you could think of, she'd done it. And in the end, she'd do anything for money. Originally, she went for Paul because he was smart, and she wanted free help for grad school exams. Once she aced the entrance exams, her worth skyrocketed. She ghosted him, broke up, and left the country with a rich guy. Before my parents' funeral, Alice came back. That's when she reconnected with Paul. Alice had a knack for making men happy, and Paul felt hugely satisfied with her. Plus, he knew enough about the law to realize that divorcing now would benefit him the most. And that led to everything after. So this time, I directly went to Alice. I offered her a lot of money to be my pawn. She was the inside person for earlier surveillance and DNA tests. I sent her the $200,000 without hesitation, and sent Alice a screenshot of the transfer. Alice, I'll be your loyal horse forever, boss. Alice, try checking if the surveillance video has been sent over. I opened the app. The video feed just came through. Paul was gone, but he posted in the neighborhood group, "All the hotels in the city are fully booked. Can any kind neighbors let me stay the night? $20K for the night. I'll wire the money right now." The group went silent, just like in my past life. After this, Paul disappeared completely, but I had already stocked up a whole place full of supplies in the penthouse. Besides daily needs, I vacuum-sealed lots of fruits and veggies. First, it could be Alice's supplies. Second, if Paul were still around, I doubted he'd give up on this place. I made this clear to Alice too. She didn't mind and just asked, "What's the deal with you and Paul? Do you really want him gone?" I didn't reply, but my intentions were pretty clear. The snow kept falling hard, and the first to feel it were the Northwest grazing lands. The livestock industry took a huge hit. Grasslands were covered in snow, cattle and sheep were freezing. Young ones couldn't survive. Some herders couldn't take it and ended their lives. City transportation was completely paralyzed by then. Snow in some neighborhoods was already piling up over the first floors. People online were panicking, but I didn't expect the contrast in rural mountain areas. 2 weeks into the snow disaster, when lootings, murders, and other violent crimes had begun cropping up in cities due to shortages, our old neighbor braved the snow to bring us 3 small winter melons and a bag of potatoes. Villagers were used to storing food for the winter. Every winter, they filled up their cellars with lots of cabbage, turnips, potatoes, sweet potatoes, and other storable foods. If any house ran out of food, everyone would contribute a little to help out. But I never expected that they'd look after outsiders like us. The neighbor, an older guy, had tried giving my dad some veggies through our door crack after my dad had politely refused. He chuckled warmly, "Take it, will ya? You guys came to experience our village's spring festival, and now there's a snowstorm. We can't do much in this weather, but here's a little something. If you ever need anything, just let me know." His words warmed our hearts, but also filled us with a twinge of shame. We came here just to escape. Even though we had enough food stored for 3 people for 6 months and plenty of supplies, getting found out could make us a target. We couldn't share like the villagers, afraid to even let it slip. We could only quietly remember the kindness, planning to help out the village whenever we could. That very night, some bandits snuck into the village. They targeted our house first because our villa, before we moved in, was used as a summer retreat, well maintained. But our doors and windows were reinforced, so they couldn't get in. Instead, they smashed the window of the neighbor who gave us veggies. I happened to be unable to sleep, up in the attic using a telescope for some stargazing, and saw everything. I quickly went downstairs and told my dad. He called the village committee. Soon, house lights gradually turned on through the village. Men grabbed tools and dogs and stormed the neighbor's house. My dad took a shovel and joined them. My mom and I watched from the attic. A few bold men with big dogs went inside. Not long after, they came out with a few young guys, bruised and battered. The village returned to calm. When my dad got back, he told us that the neighbor was smart enough to hide his family in their cellar before anything happened, with no harm done. The would-be thieves were from a nearby village, orphans with nothing to eat. The villagers didn't push it further. They ended up giving each of them a bag of food on their way out. With no crops in the fields and supplies scarce, it was a decent thing to do. My mom hesitated. Maybe we should share some of our supplies. It's a bit awkward. My dad sighed. It would have been fine earlier, but now how do we explain taking stuff outside? Let's wait for a better time. And that was that for the moment. Late at night, I was sound asleep when my phone started shaking wildly. I groggily answered hello. Alice on the other end was sobbing, "Anna, Paul isn't dead, he's back." I sat bolt upright, fully awake. What happened? Take your time, tell me. Alice's voice was shaky. Paul showed up with some guys, broke down my door with an axe. He's lost weight, has a scar on his face, terrifying. When they barged in, I hid by the door and ran like crazy when they went in looking around. Paul chased me, he won't let me go. My phone buzzed again. Alice transferred over $270,000 to my account. In my ear, Alice was still crying. "Anna, I've sent you all my savings. If I don't make it, give them to my mom. I've been a disappointment to her all my life. Let this be my apology." Her sobbing was heart-wrenching. For someone as money-loving as Alice to give it up like this, she must really be cornered. I closed my eyes. Head to the village over on the west. Take the mountain road. I'll find a way to get you. I thought Alice would thank me, but she cried even more. Paul is after me. I'm afraid I'll lead him to you. My voice was firm. Alice, you're not dead yet, don't give up. I wasn't taking the moral high ground, just making it square with her. In my past life, when Paul locked me outside, it was through the door I heard Alice yell, "Paul, have some shame. This house was Anna's to start with. It's freezing out there. She doesn't even have a coat. Are you trying to let her freeze? Going too far to leave someone to die. You're not afraid of karma?" For saying that, Paul hit her hard, told her to shut up. That's why I realized that while Alice loved money, she wasn't as bad as she seemed. In this life, it's what made me approach her to work together. This time I'd pay it back. We were lucky that the power lines going down didn't affect us, since my dad had set up a power system in the villa. After reporting to the village committee, they started a system where someone would pick up people's devices every 10 days, bring them to our place to charge, and distribute them back. 2 days later, Alice's phone was finally working again. I called her. Paul's face was on the screen instead. His gaunt face was even thinner with a nasty scar from his eye to his cheek. "Anna, it really is you." I kept my expression stern. "Where's Alice?" He moved the phone, and I saw Alice, face down in the snow under Paul's foot. She wasn't moving, and I couldn't tell if she was still alive. My anger flared. "Paul, this world won't stay wrecked forever. Aren't you afraid of prison?" He sneered. "Prison? If we even survive till then." Suddenly, he pulled back his heavy clothes, showing the camera a gash on his belly. "Anna, you know how I got this? That night you had Alice lock me out. Your colleague Larry let me in, charging me $20,000 a day. I stayed 10 days, spent all my money, but when I have nothing left, they wanted me out. Out there I'd freeze. Convinced they'd let me die, I killed him, his wife and kids. He slashed me with that knife. My body went cold, and it took a second to remember Larry. I shouted angrily, didn't Larry have every right to cut you? I mean, his kid is just 3. Why didn't that stab from Larry finish you off? Paul yelled back, in the end, it's because of you, and that bitch Alice. You both made me like this. Really? Even in a past life, when Alice and I didn't do anything, wasn't he just as despicable? While we were talking, Paul suddenly lifted the foot that was on the back of Alice's head. Alice immediately arched her back and started coughing violently. Paul stared coldly at the screen. But I've changed my mind, Anna. If you want to swap Alice back, what do you have to offer? I snorted and gave him a cold glance, then hung up the video call. Who does he think he is to negotiate terms with me? After I hung up, I walked to my bedroom looking annoyed and pulled out a drone from under the bed. I sent it out because when Paul flipped the screen, I recognized the scenery. It was the entrance of the village. Sure enough, the drone quickly located Paul and 3 others. Paul was looking twisted and brutally abusing Alice. The other 3 were around her, taking advantage as she actually embraced it, and even tried to sow discord between them and Paul. I had all the pictures printed and gave them to my dad to take to the village committee. Timing it right, I lied to Mom, saying I was going to find Dad at the committee, and managed to sneak out. Though the snow was heavy, the roads in the village stayed clear. The villagers constantly organized to shovel it away, so walking wasn't too difficult. 20 minutes later, I showed up at the village entrance. As soon as Paul saw me, he stopped abusing Alice and started walking towards me with a knife. "Bitch, looking for your death?" he threatened. But just as he got close, I showed no emotion and raised my hand, spraying the pepper spray right into his eyes. "Ah!" Paul cried out in pain. Clang! The knife dropped to the ground. Taking advantage of his agony, I fiercely kicked behind his knee and quickly handcuffed him. The other three noticed the commotion and began moving towards me. But from behind me came the sound of barking dogs. 3 fierce black guard dogs pounced on them, and they ran off in fear, one even wetting his pants. Seeing my dad and members of the village committee chasing them armed with shovels and tools, I focused back on Paul. I walked up to him, grabbed his chin in one hand while slapping him hard with the other. "Paul, didn't you always want to know where your parents went? I'll tell you now, those charred bodies in that car accident were your parents. You messed with my dad's car to try and hurt him and my mom, but you ended up killing your own parents. Does it hurt? There's more to hurt about." I slowly stood up, coldly throwing a pregnancy report and a small box at him. "This baby was discovered after your parents' funeral. I had an abortion after taking antibiotics, so it couldn't be determined as a boy or girl. The ashes are in this box." Alice told me Paul wanted a kid, and it was one reason he brought up divorce and property division. We'd been married 5 years, and I never got pregnant. He even checked himself at the hospital. His fertility was top-notch, so he thought the issue was with me. Paul finally managed to open his eyes. His bloodshot stare gave me chills, and after a long pause, he trembled as he spoke. "Good thing it died. Otherwise, bringing a child into the apocalypse would only mean suffering." I had enough and didn't look at him again. Supportively, I helped Alice back home. With limited food in the village, Paul and his group of 4 weren't detained. They were beaten by villagers and then tossed out. 2 of them had dog bites so bad you could see bone. I saw using my drone. They stumbled initially supporting each other, drinking snow when thirsty. When food became impossible to find, those 2 injured turned burdensome. In the end, Paul and another guy killed them. The drone could only go so far. The last footage showed Paul fighting his partner over resources until Paul got pushed off a cliff. "You think Paul is really dead?" Alice asked me from the couch after watching the video. I shook my head, no idea. "Hopefully." I pondered a moment, then turned to Alice. "What about you? What are you planning after the apocalypse ends?" Alice tore open a bag of chips. "Anna, can I stick with you and make money afterward? I'm someone without morals. I'd risk my life for money, but for your saving my life, I swear I'll never betray you." I chuckled but didn't respond. Alice perceptively shifted the conversation. After 6 months, when the blizzard apocalypse drained our supplies, my dad approached the village committee and sincerely apologized, agreeing to donate all our resources and face it together. 3 months later, the sky cleared. Temperatures began warming. Only then did I allow myself to believe the apocalypse had really ended. Reformed, the government rolled out grand rescue operations, restoring public facilities, and a crackdown on crime. When that broadcast came over the radio, our family was ecstatic. I handed all the footage and photos to the police. What Paul and the others did was classified as a major crime, launching a nationwide manhunt. Alive or dead, they wanted them. For clearing out snow, the village asked for volunteers. My dad was ready to jump in. The snow kept falling, with just one roadway connecting us to the outside. Villagers were organized daily for large-scale clearings. With my dad using the snowblower we had prepared in advance, efficiency greatly improved. The supplies got delivered faster, and everyone benefited from it. I'm so grateful to be born in our strong country. I also learned sustainable ways to grow vegetables from experts around the world, taking advantage of the time when the roads were getting repaired. I used my connections to bring in a large batch of hydroponic crops and related books. I plan to start growing them in an unused room at my house. After a few days of continuous work, I finally got everything planted. Just as I was collapsing onto the couch exhausted, my mom came running over in a panic. "Paul, the village committee just called. Your dad is missing. This village is pretty remote, and the electricity and cell service haven't been restored yet. So people went out in pairs to clear the snow, with instructions to check back by 6 p.m. every day. My dad had always made it back on time before 6. But today, it was almost 9 p.m., and he and the neighbor who went with him still weren't back. It wasn't until almost 10 p.m. that the neighbor returned, saying my dad had driven off the mountain road. When my mom heard this, she fainted right away. We and some villagers, who came to help after hearing the news, braved the snow to search down the mountain. The heavy snow limited visibility, making it hard to get our bearings. I could only hope my dad was conscious enough to hear our calls. About half an hour of searching later, we suddenly heard the sound of someone hitting rocks, and a weak response ahead. I ran over quickly and found my dad sitting in a snow pit he made himself, unable to move. I was overjoyed and rushed to hug him. Just then a dark figure suddenly dashed by. A villager exclaimed, "A wild man. It's a wild man. Wild men attack people." Everyone's spirits dropped instantly. We didn't dare to stay long and started to leave. My dad was injured in the leg but otherwise okay. The village reported the wild man in the mountains. Soon, the police started setting up surveillance to catch him. But none of us expected it to be Paul. Since I was the one who reported it, I was called in to sit in on the proceedings. Paul had fallen, but used his excellent climbing skills to get back up. He killed his companion. Then he survived by breaking into homes, killing and stealing supplies. After the blizzard ended, he was wanted and went into hiding in the mountains. Incidents like this were discovered over 100 times in the city alone. The police used Paul's case as a model example. He was sentenced to death. As more involved got caught, the 9-month-long blizzard apocalypse officially came to an end. My company returned to normal operations. On the first official day of work, my office door was pushed open. Alice strolled in boldly. "Anna, where's my desk? Today's my first day, so I'm getting paid, right?" Aha! The end.